Professor Magnus Korpås. He is at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim, Norway. That's where I did my studies as well. Magnus is a professor in electrical power engineering, and he leads a research group on electricity markets and energy systems planning. He is a busy guy. He's supervising about 10 PhD students, and he teaches courses on power markets, as well as participating in a number of different research projects at the national and European level. His research interests are within renewable energy, energy storage, power markets, and energy systems integration. He received his PhD from NTNU in 2004, and he has also been a research director at SINTEF Energy Research, also in Trondheim, Norway. And back in 2018 to 2019, I had the pleasure of hosting Magnus as during his sabbatical, which is spent at MIT. And the work that he is going to present came out of his sabbatical here at MIT. So I'm looking forward to his presentation. I should, for full disclosure, add that I'm also a co-author on this work. And as you see, the title is How Costs Are Recovered in Electricity Markets with Wind, Solar and Storage Plants, an Analytical Approach.
Okay, then thank you very much for the nice introduction, and nice meeting you again. You hear me well here?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. And I also was attending the last year's MIT Applied Energy conference in Boston, which was a pleasure. So I'm glad I can also join in a digital version, and hopefully we can see each other all the next time again physically. Okay, so as Odin said, this work we have been doing together the last, I would say, past 1.5 to 2 years since I started my sabbatical at MIT 2 years ago. So just so you know that Trondheim is in Norway is 6 hours ahead of Boston. So I would say welcome to the night lecture in power market theory. So the presentation builds upon a current working paper in the MIT CEPR series titled Optimality Conditions and Cost Recovery in Electricity Markets with Variable Renewable Energy and Energy Storage. So we started this research by exploring how renewable energy and storage influence the profitability of different assets that are installed in the power system. So a common hypothesis is that traditional electricity markets fail under large-scale penetration of wind and solar, since they are driven by natural variations in the energy source and produced with zero or close to zero marginal cost. And this is foreseen to lead to price collapse, and plants needed for balancing can be pushed out of the market. However, our results is that there can exist market equilibria where all plants recovers their costs in traditional energy only markets with these technologies, at least in theory. And the prices will be well defined over the course of the year, and the costs are recovered in optimum. So therefore, our suggestion based on this analysis is that we should think twice before embarking on a complete redesign of electricity markets, just because we get some new technologies that becomes competitive. So if you look a bit about what how present markets have been tackling renewable energy integration, we know that there is a merit, so-called merit order effect of wind and solar, which means that as they enter the market, the price for electricity is reduced, since they have zero marginal cost, and thus replace some more expensive generation. But also notice, by looking into details, that other price effects can be much more dominant, such as the gas price effect observed in the US markets between 2018 and 2016. But this is historic values. Now looking a bit ahead in the, say, in the short, some short run scenarios ahead, we also see that we can expect a further, let's say, increase in the merit order effect as more wind and solar enters the market. So no surprises there, but it then raises some question regarding the profitability of these technologies themselves, and also how the flexible power generation units and storage units can kind of survive in a market with such gradually lowering of prices. What has been mostly covered by literature so far is how variable renewable energy is affecting the market when they are entering the market based on different subsidy schemes, which has driven most of the investments the last 20-30 years in wind and solar. But recent cost reductions have changed this picture, I would say, dramatically in the recent years. And now it's interesting to start looking at how does actually these technologies, and also storage technologies like lithium-ion battery storage systems, how does this actually influence the market equilibrium when they are competitive with other technologies for supplying the electricity. And this has gained, I would say, quite much attention the latest years, especially in discussion forums and so forth. But also in some recent studies from MIT, like from Richard Schmolensky and Paul Joshkov, both from Sloan School of Management, who has worked on similar working papers as we present here, with their ideas and perspectives on these questions. But I want to emphasize that we look at scenarios where renewable energy and storage is competitive, and that the power production mix in the future will, if markets work, probably constitute of quite much of these technologies. So to give an example about that, I would like to highlight some recent results from another study that we have recently published together with postdoc Mehdi Jafari at Odin's group at MIT. This study is about power system decarbonization pathways for Italy by year 2050. So we have not done market studies here, but power system optimization approach, where we minimize total system cost given cost scenarios for the different technologies and for the different fuels up to 2050. So if you look at this picture to the left, it shows the optimal generation mix in this future power system, with different levels of CO2 constraints. So the most constrained situation is at the right hand of this figure. So with tougher CO2 constraints, the amount of solar is also then increasing. And this figure is without batteries. And if we add batteries to the production portfolio, again given cost projections, this time from NREL for the battery costs, we see that we can expect that the battery storage technology will trigger even more and substantially more solar power in the system than if batteries are not a part of the mix. So we see that there is a clear, I would say, win-win situation between storage and especially solar in this case. As said, this way we worked with this in that particular study was using a centralized cost minimization approach, where it's a central planner who decides on the power mix to find minimum cost for everyone. But what we wanted to look at in addition is how this solution will work in a market setting, where each of the power producers have to recover their cost and should maximize their profits. Both the thermal generation, the storage units, and the owners of wind and solar power. So then we go into the market aspects. So we and our fundament is the basic and presently much used energy only market, which is based on marginal cost pricing of power. So the classical works in this subject, and particularly from MIT and from Sloan, is dated back from, can find interesting papers about this from the 70s and especially the 80s. It shows how this market design will lead exactly to system optimal investments and operation in a perfect market. And in this market equilibrium, all the generation companies, they are price takers and they maximize their profits and recover their cost. However, the classical works in power markets was mainly limited to traditional thermal generation, which has fuel costs. And there has been very limited analysis on theoretical market analysis, where we include variable renewables and storage systems. There are a few exceptions, like Stefan and Weber's article from 2013 in Energy Economics, which is very good, and also the recent works from Sloan School of Management. And in our model, we try to keep things as simple as possible, but not too simplified, which is a challenge when it comes to these technologies, which are varying in nature, and also storage, which has intertemporal links. So we assume that there is what we call scarcity pricing, or value of lost load, that ensures cost recovery of the peaking unit in this system. And we have no payment for firm capacity assumed here, and no subsidy for any generator or storage technology. So this figure shows our simplified power system as simplified as it's possible to draw it and represent it. So in our case, we do one important simplification, is to have a fixed demand So this is not a flexible demand unless if it's not enough power capacity available to cover the fixed demand, then there will be a curtailment of load, and we get this scarcity price. And the baseload plant and the peaker plant are thermal generators, and the baseload has a high capital cost and low marginal cost, while the peaker is cheap to install but expensive to operate. So the variable renewable energy source can be either wind or solar, and is characterized by relatively high investment cost and zero marginal cost, and the output driven by weather variations. And the storage is kept simple and general in the description. We represent it by its charging and discharging losses and its storage capacity. So if we now look at this system and think of the central planners approach, the problem is to find the plant capacities and operation which minimizes the cost of the delivered energy. And the objective function, mathematically speaking, of this problem is then to minimize the cost C, which is then equal to the sum of the annualized investment cost and the annual operating cost for the whole system. And we need to add the constraints for this problem, which is plant constraints. The load has the power generation has to be equal to the demand. Storage constraints has to be fulfilled, and so on. This is a classic cost minimization problem for this central planning approach. Now, if we look at the market solution instead, the market players want to maximize their profits. So the market equilibrium is the plant mix that happens when all participants tries to maximize their profits. So for each of the participants here, or plant owners, the profit to be maximized is their annual revenues from the market, subtracted their operating cost and their investment costs. And we assume here perfect market conditions, and that is that each plant owner cannot exercise market power. So they are so small that they are price takers, and each generator unit bid their marginal cost, while the storage owner bids then their marginal value of stored energy, or their opportunity cost in the market. This is derived actually from our model, what this price bidded from the price bid from the storage unit will be in this market. So before we look at the storage and the renewable components, we can then look at how we solve this simply and analytically in the traditional case with just thermal generation. Then we take the load which we are to supply, and we sort it in a demand duration curve, and we see in this example that the baseload plant is operating the whole time, while the total operating hours of the peaker is shown as the TP in this figure, and the duration of load shedding is TS, and this is the amount of hours where the installed capacity is not sufficient to cover all the demand. And during those hours, the price is very high, and we ensure that the peaker recovers its costs. So the system optimality conditions for this quite simple problems gives the optimal duration of all these generators here. We take the minimum cost for the whole system and find the optimal solution, while profit maximization of each generator gives the same result, where we maximize the profit. That is to set the first order derivative to 0 for all plant capacities which are to be optimized. And this gives the same solutions, and also we can easily show that the costs are exactly recovered in this optimal case. And when we have know the durations of each plant, we can then easily from the duration curve find the optimal capacity of the different technologies analytically. So what happens when we let wind power enter this system? Well, this is here we show the net demand curve for this system, which is the demand seen from the thermal generators point of view. So that is simply the demand subtracted with the renewable energy generation. Like this. So as wind power gets cheaper, it will be more installed wind power, and that will push the net demand curve downwards when it come to a point where we get some hours with less than zero zero net demand. And that means basically that we need to curtail some wind power to keep balance between load and generation. So wind power covers all the load, and we need to curtail some of it, and the price will be 0, because wind is the marginal generator, and the marginal cost of wind is assumed to be 0. So in this case, we can do the same thing as with the standard case with thermal generation. We need to find the system optimality conditions from each of these plants, and the duration of the base power plant, where the price is higher than 0, is now set by the optimality condition of the wind power plant. And we can then, when we solve this, we find that basically the wind power will replace much of the base plant capacity, and there will be some more peaker capacity installed to cover more of the flexibility needed in the high price hours, and we also get slightly more load shedding, and we get some curtailment of wind power. So if you look at the price segments here, we get a small price segment where the demand sets the price, where we have to shed load, extremely high price, and then we have the peaker price and the baseload price, and then 0 price for the variable renewable. So now I will just briefly introduce what happens in this model when storage enter the market. So storage links energy content in time, and therefore it's not possible to include it directly in a duration curve approach without major simplifications. So what we do here is to explicitly take into account the efficiency of storage and the power capacity of storage, but we simplify the representation of the energy storage capacity of the storage, the kVH constraint, which kind of it's the challenging one to model in this duration curve approach, where we sort the load and variable renewable energy time series, because then the intertemporal links doesn't is not very easy to model in that case. But even with just the KV constraints, we can get some interesting insights in how the storage will behave in such a market system. So if we now look at one simplified approach for modeling the storage in this framework, we say that we use the storage in this case to charge surplus wind power, which is shown at the right-hand side of this figure, and we discharge it whenever we want. We have kind of an unlimited storage, which is very optimistic, of course, although it can be a good representation of Norwegian and Canadian hydropower when that is used to balance neighboring countries' renewables. But for batteries, for instance, this is a too optimistic approach, but it's a good starting point. So the point is that now we assume that we can shift the energy to any time instant of the year, and then we see that we have some hours here where the storage capacity, the charging capacity is fully utilized. So then the price will still be zero. Well, there is a small segment here between TB and TV, which is interesting. And this is where the storage is the marginal load. And it sets the price based on the opportunity cost of storage, which is actually given by what it can earn from when it discharges again at a later stage. But we have to adjust with the for the efficiency of it, and we can set up this system, or as we did with the others, in a way that we find also the optimality condition for the storage plant. And what is interesting here is that we create a new price segment, as I explained, where the storage sets the price, and this is beneficial for the renewable energy plant, because then we have a new price segment where the renewable energy plant earns more money than without storage, where it was zero. So this shows how storage can trigger more wind and solar in the market system, since it actually sets the price in some critical hours of the year. And this leads to a further reduction of thermal also in the system. So I'll leave the details on more. We have done some other experiments on more advanced models, but I'll leave that and show some examples on how to use this model. So this is not an optimization model as such. This is an analytical model where we actually calculate the optimal plant capacities and durations directly. So it's a very simple and quick calculator, so to say. So we have I've done some studies with a European for European 2050 scenarios, where we have these components as I showed, and we then have three cases. First, the case one is without any renewable or storage units, and case two we add, in this case, offshore wind power, and in case three we add the storage unit, which is can then be a battery storage system or a pumped hydro system. So if you look at how the resulting power capacities becomes in such a system, we see that the renewables replace basically baseload plant, while when we add the storage, we get a further increase in the variable renewables because of the new price segments, and a further reduction of the thermal power plants. And we can also see that we get new price segments when we introduce these technologies, but the prices doesn't collapse. We have many hours with zero price, but actually we all plants recovers their costs in this case. And another interesting effect is that the introduction of competitive wind or solar power reduces the prices a lot, the average price for the consumer a lot in the system. And while storage further increases the use of variable renewables, it doesn't impact the total costs a lot. So, but it has a significant an impact on the energy delivered from the thermal generators, so that it's mainly its benefits is to, I would say, is to reduce CO2 emissions further, and it's not so much on the impact of the total costs. So to wrap up, I will say that we have found that that for systems with variable renewables and storage plants included, we find that profit maximization in the market gives the same optimality conditions as if there were a central planner who did all the investments as a cost minimization problem. So this is just as in the case with thermal energy, with systems with only thermal energy. And also we found that the optimal variable renewable capacity will always lead to some excess energy if it's profitable to install the component. And if we introduce energy storage, it will trigger more installed variable renewable capacity due to its effect on the prices in the system. And this leads to a further reduction of thermal capacity, so that the thermal capacity is kind of reduced because of two effects for the storage. First, the storage triggers more variable renewables, which pushes more thermal out of the system. And also storage can be used in the high price hours, which leads to a system which is less reliant on peaking capacity and thermal capacity as such. So it's double effect, I would say, on the thermal energy. And finally, the variable renewable energy and storage together will reduces the average energy prices in equilibrium, as long as they are competitive, as they most probably will be, if not they already are in some areas of the world. So with that, I think that I will end my talk, and I'm happy to answer some questions and discuss this further. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Magnus, for the overview of the more theoretical analysis of how markets may work. with high levels of renewables and storage. So again, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A box. Let's see, let's actually take a question right away here from Tyler Ruggles. Have you considered a fourth system with wind and EES and no base or peaker? How would costs be recorded in those systems?
Yes, thanks for that question. No, we haven't studied that in detail. We have discussed it though, and it's extremely interesting. I think how I would go on with this this system or this problem is that we have to introduce more demand segments. I don't think so. This first model that we have started on here, we have not taken into account that we have let's say more price segments from at the demand side. So it's a fixed demand with a scarcity pricing, but this system, as you ask about, is very interesting to discuss, and I would then like to introduce at least one demand flexibility step to when we are going to analyze that problem.
All right, great. Here's another question from Shailesh Wasti. Can you explain more on how your model on how you model opportunity cost for ESS storage? That is it taken similar as marginal cost function for thermal generators? Does opportunity cost apply to demand response, demand curtailment too?
Yes. So in our case, we model storage in a way that when storage is charging with less than its installed charging capacity, then it is the marginal load in the system. So in our model, we show then that the optimal price during those hours where the storage is the marginal load is given from what we can earn when we discharge that power later. So if that is to replace baseload power, then the opportunity cost would then, in theory, in our simple model, be exactly the price or the marginal cost of the baseload plant multiplied by the round trip efficiency of storage. This is what it then can earn, and that could then also apply to whether that applies to other demand. If you have just flexible demand, that would be different, right? Because then it would be the marginal value of this actual electricity demand. So, for instance, it can be said to be simple, a similar approach as fuel switching, where you have flexible electricity demand. If the price is low enough, you use electricity to fuel something instead of, for instance, oil for heating, and then we have oil as the kind of opportunity cost for the flexible electrical heating, and the storage is kind of treated in a similar fashion here.
Great. Maybe I'll take the opportunity to ask the last question, if you can go another minute or so here. So Magnus, you show that under certain obviously simplistic assumptions, a free market can be sufficient for technologies, including storage and renewables, to recover their costs. Now, is that going to be sufficient to solve the decarbonization challenge here, or can we leave it to the market to reach ambitious climate goals?
That's a hard question. I think personally that if we had left these issues to be solved by the markets alone at the early stage, like 20 years ago, we wouldn't have these technologies here at the technology, say the quality of the plants that we see today, and the low cost today. If we didn't have if we didn't have the support schemes that created a politically driven market that reduced the cost, so we came to this position that we are now, where kind of we can leave more to the market when it comes to renewables. But we can't leave it to the market, I would say, to set the right price for carbon, because this is like a common challenge, and I think that pricing carbon sufficiently high would be is a very important cornerstone in getting not perhaps cost optimal, but at least cost efficient solutions to deal with that problem. And then I think that renewables, as they have come so far, as they have today, have will probably be a big part of at least the electrical energy supply, which is then again also part of the decarbonization challenge. And that said, I would also say that I think with that respect is what will be important then to decarbonize further is to study in more detail how the electricity system is interacting with other energy sectors like transport, heating, and especially those sectors, so that we can have a kind of optimal switch between electricity and other energy carriers to drive carbon emissions further down than what is possible with electricity alone.
Great, thanks a lot, Magnus. That's a lot of food for thought there. So I see we're a little bit over time, so let's wrap up the session. Let's give a virtual round of applause for our presenters. Get some sleep, Magnus, and with that, back to Drew.